Robert Quinn once said, given the choice between deep change or slow death, we tend to choose slow death. That doesn't have to be true for your church. We're going to talk about that today on the Church Revitalization Podcast.
Hello, and welcome to the Church Revitalization Podcast, brought to you by the Malphurs Group team, where each week we tackle important, actionable topics to help churches thrive. And now, here's your hosts, Scott Ball and AJ Matthew.
Welcome to the Church Revitalization Podcast. My name is Scott Ball. I am joined by my co-host and friend, AJ Matthew. Welcome to the podcast. We're glad that you guys are here today. We're going to hop straight into things, but first, let me tell you about our friends at Faith Street. Faith Street is an iOS and Android app that helps to build community in your church by leveraging technology. It helps to build those bridges between the Sunday morning experience from week to week so that you can build these habits of generosity and mindfulness and reflecting on the teaching and praying for one another. These things are so important, and Faith Street is a tool to help you facilitate those practices. So, Church Revitalization Podcast listeners can get 20% off by going to faithstreet.com/Malphurs, faithstreet.com/Malphurs, MALPHURS. Thanks to our friends at Faith Street for sponsoring this episode. AJ, I really appreciated that you threw me a bone and started off this episode today with a bit of a quote from Robert Quinn's book, Building the Bridge as You Walk on It, a guide for leading change. It is, for our listeners, it's not a church book. It's a business book, but all truth is God's truth, right? So there's some really good principles here for leading change that I think
our YouTube listeners got to see the cover. If you're listening, you could go back and watch it on YouTube, and Scott showed you the cover.
AJ's comment was that it looked self-published.
Oh, and now see, Robert Quinn's probably a faithful listener of the podcast, and now I've hurt his feelings. Why'd you go and throw me under the bus, Scott?
It is a legit published book for sure. Not that there's anything wrong with self-publishing, by the way, AJ. So,
and no, I don't have a problem with that at all. And it's also okay for people to have varying opinions on how the cover of a book looks.
All right, we're already off track. Okay, so let's kind of, I think we need to answer a fundamental question first, which is, why do churches tend to die slowly? We typically, when we're working with a church, and like on the church ministry analysis, for example, we'll draw a life cycle chart. And when we draw the life cycle chart, we typically, the tail end of it, we draw just like the front end of it, like a typical bell curve, right? But that's not really how churches or organizations or anything dies, really. The tail on it is very long.
Yeah.
It's decline, decline,
where it goes straight down.
That's right. At the very end, there's a steep little cliff there. But for the most part, it's slow. And it's not really a mystery. This is the natural sort of way of things. When you have a closed system, we see this in physics, right? It's the second law of thermodynamics, that in a closed system without external energy, things tend to devolve towards chaos or a state of disrepair. And churches and organizations, cities that were railroad towns, and then the interstate was built, and all of these things, nations themselves, over time decline because of these same challenges.
Yeah.
And so if your church remains a closed system and it's resistant to outside energy that's required for fundamental and deep change, your church will inevitably die. That's just facts, right? And so that's the quote that you gave, right?
Yeah.
Given the choice between deep change or slow death, all of us, tend to choose slow death.
Yeah. So the problem is, when a church begins down that path, nobody is there to go, we're making a choice here between change and slow death. That we don't get the benefit of that clarity at the beginning.
That's exactly right. That's right. Because you're in your little cocoon. You're in that comfort zone. In fact, that's another quote from the book here. Quinn says that in our comfort zone, we can only imitate that which has been done in the past. So we're just going to keep repeating what we know. And therefore, everyone is colluding in avoiding the pursuit of excellence. There is a very real sense that if we don't have any new energy, new ideas, new people, new leadership, then we're not even really aware that what we're doing is slowly dying.
That's right. It's unconscious or subconscious or unintentional collusion.
That's right.
Yeah.
So I think we have one real benefit in this moment in time. It's a fleeting moment, AJ, but it is here, in that every church had to shut down last year. Every church. And if you're in Canada, we're so sorry for you. We know that a lot of you are still closed. But every church had to shut down for a season. And so there was this external crisis that I think has led a lot of churches to kind of wake up and go, wait a minute, hold on. Maybe we have more problems than just COVID-19.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, not every church is seeing that, but a lot of them are. And so maybe you're in this moment and you're thinking, I don't want that to be my church. I don't want it to die a slow death. Do you really want your generation in your church to be the generation that closes this church? Think about that. Do you want to be the last pastor? Maybe your church has that hallway with all the pictures of the dead pastors from 1875. Do you want to be the last picture on that wall? Well, I would encourage you to be the last one on that wall just so that you can take the pictures off the wall, but just generally. But I don't love those walls, the wall of fame. But do you want to be the last picture that would end up on that wall? Is a question you have to ask yourself.
Yeah. If you haven't thought about asking that question, I hope that today's episode is one that'll cause you to be introspective and also just to look back. I mean, just consider what has happened in your church over the last 10 years. Does that trajectory point up or down? If it points down, then you may be presently in a slow death situation.
At minimum, AJ, 4,000 churches close every year. It's likely much higher than that, but a verifiable number is at least somewhere around 4,000 or 4,500 churches are closing every year. Half of the churches in the United States are average 75 people or fewer before the pandemic. So half of all churches were already very small, and 90% of churches average under 350. So you're talking about the vast majority of churches going into the pandemic were on a razor's edge in terms of critical mass in the first place. And so we're not trying to suggest that every church ought to be a mega church or that even ought to be the goal. I'm just pointing out the objective fact that if you lost 40% of your people because of the pandemic and a year later they're still gone, and you were at 50 people, you're in a real pinch. Yeah. So that slow death may have been accelerated by this external crisis. So this is a real problem that a lot of churches are dealing with, AJ. And we just want to, today's episode is actually, despite the topic and despite this introduction, an encouragement.
We hope by the end, yes.
We hope. Church death is not inevitable. So we want to give you 4 things that you can do to kind of break that cycle and maybe start a new S curve and start to move away from slow death and start towards growth.
Yeah. All right. So let's jump into it here with point 1. And so I'm just going to go out. I'm just going to come right out and say the V word, Scott. Vision. Okay. And so now people are, oh, great. They're going to talk about vision. Yes, but in a different way, because we want you to think about vision differently. And in the work that we do with churches, we break vision down into 3 parts, and we don't need to get into all that today, but the big picture, longest term vision outlook that we talk about, we call vision impact or big vision impact. And so I want you to really focus in on that word impact today. because vision can be confusing. And if you quizzed everybody in your church right now, they would have different answers for what vision means. You might have a vision statement on your church website right now, and it might not align with what we define vision as.
Yeah.
So think about impact. And when we talk about vision, what is the impact your church can, should, and hopefully will make on your city, your state, the world in the next few years? What impact, what would the effects of your church, if it were healthy and firing on all cylinders, what change in the world would you make? That's the way we like to talk about the V word, vision, in the church. And I think that maybe Scott can help bring some clarity and help unify teams and churches around what we're actually trying to do. Let's talk about what is the impact going to be when we're all in this together.
Yeah. I'm just in my work with churches, and I know you've encountered this a lot too. There's usually a bunch of people in your church who are going to have hangups over the word vision, not just because there's a lack of clarity around what the word even means, but also because they associate it with business thinking, and it's like a business term, and that term's not in the Bible, and all this. So people have hangups, and I think that the term vision often has a lot of baggage with it. But the first point we're trying to make here is that you need to define the impact that you desire. Essentially, you need to ask yourself the question, what difference does my church make? If your church closed tomorrow, and not just for a short term like COVID, but was done, would it matter? Yeah. And the inverse of that being, if you wanted to matter to your city, to your community, to your neighborhood, in what way would you want to matter? What impact would you want to make? What difference would you want to make? When we talk about vision in that sense, that's what we're talking about. And that to me is not an unholy question. I can point to lots of places in the Bible where you would point to a leader or an individual and say they clearly had in mind an impact that they wanted to make. I love Nehemiah as a great example of this. He sees a problem in Jerusalem. It causes him so much trauma that he's weeping over it. And then we're about to talk about risks here in just a little bit. But, to the point that he's willing to take a risk to go to fulfill the impact, the difference that he wants to make, which is to transform Jerusalem from an unsafe city to a safe city, to transform Jerusalem from a place that has no cultural identity. They're constantly being attacked by people from the outside, to a place that is secure enough and clear enough that it has its own identity because it has its walls. So it's not an unholy thing to have an impact in mind that you want to make, a difference that you want to make. And to be frank, AJ, if a church doesn't have in its own mind, in a shared sense, an impact that everyone agrees we need to make this impact. We talked about this in last week's episode. But if you don't have that shared dream, it's impossible for you to break free from that decline.
Yeah, for sure. And in that effect, that impact that you would have, I mean, that's birthed out of being on mission. If your church is focused on making and maturing disciples of Jesus, you will have an impact. And God gives you the freedom to discern that from him. What will this big impact be? So if you're baptizing little to no people every year, if your church is not out there in your community, in your city, if you're not sharing your faith, if you're not meeting new people, then you aren't having an impact. I'm sorry to say. The impact, God wanted to have an impact on the world. He sent his son, to die for our sins, for us to be the church, to be the hands and feet of Christ. That there's a natural impact that happens when we're doing that. Churches that aren't doing that don't make an impact. Nope. At least not one with any eternal consequence. There are churches making impacts, but they're not eternal. And we're talking about big eternal impact. And so there's a lot.
So I just want to get away from people thinking like, oh, it's just this foo-foo thing, pie in the sky. It's not that. It's you have to have in your mind a very clear impact difference that you want to make. We've talked about this in past episodes, but I'm a big believer that people can be depressed and organizations can also be depressed, because organizations are just a collection of people. And so when an organization doesn't have something to look forward to, this is what causes depression. When people feel like I have nothing's going to get better, I have nothing to look forward to, nothing excites me, nothing about the future sort of arouses my interest and piques my interest and makes me want to get up. That same thing happens, AJ, with whole congregations. There's a sense that nothing's going to get better. We're never going to grow. We're never going to reach anybody. There's nothing to look forward to. And the way to break free from that is to develop a dream. To develop a difference that you want to make, an impact that you want to make. Yeah.
I was just having this conversation this morning with Danny Laverde. He's our European point person as we're working through an expansion into Europe. And there's a great apathy in the church in Europe. And Danny gets it like we do. And he's excited about the change that we can make, for churches over there as well. But this was the exact conversation. The churches are, well, just as I said, they're apathetic. And we talked about the antidote to that is big vision, creating in your mind this impact that the church can have. That's what gets people excited. That's what makes them want to participate in ministry, with their time, talent, and treasure, and make a difference in the world. So yeah, you can't overstate the necessity of having a shared, unified, big vision impact in mind for your church.
That's right. Yep. Okay. I think we nailed that one home. Nailed that one home. That's not a thing someone says.
Do we get excited about that? Yeah. Mixed metaphors. That's awesome.
Yeah. There you go. Let's move on.
Number 2, you got to tackle negative internal realities in the church. And this is when we work with churches, we cover, kind of 5 primary things. But when we start talking about core values, so again, we're not using the term core values except for right now, because I just said it. So big vision impact is kind of, how we want you to frame vision for you. Tackling negative internal realities comes out of a work on discovering your core values. And even that, saying it that way, Scott, discovering your core values, look, churches might be like, we mean discovering, we made a list. We wrote down things, and that's not the same as a discovery process. That's just like, hey, this sounds good. And so the other side of core values is, I don't know, sometimes we use the term anti-values, Scott, discovering things that we do with maybe just our natural tendency towards things that are comfortable or easy or familiar or traditional. And they're not helping move you forward towards that great vision impact. And so it's important to not only set our sights on what is good and right, but also remember and to some extent memorialize things that are wrong and unhealthy, so that we can hold each other accountable to no longer do those.
Yeah, and the whole point of it is that they're almost always unconscious.
Yeah,
these negative things. So I feel like now we're just the book plug show. But Aubrey has a book called Look Before You Lead. It's a book about culture, about church culture. I'm just adding it to the stack of books that I now have over here, things that I've plugged in recent episodes. He talks about how there's 3 layers to culture, and not to get it too far into it, but essentially there's kind of what you say you are, these sort of external things, then what people believe you are, these internal beliefs, and there's also actions and behaviors, basically what you actually do. And these 3 things together kind of develop your culture. So, and there's often an incongruity between these things. So we often will say or have signs that say, welcome, we welcome you, we welcome everyone, we're a church for all people, we're not your grandma's church, whatever, like you come as you are, wear whatever you want. Like we have all these kinds of things that we say. And then there's sort of our beliefs about ourselves that if we were honest, we might identify, which is we welcome people that we like, or who look like us, talk like us, share some other cultural type values with us. If someone really different walked in off the street, we may not actually be totally okay with them being here. And then there's more fundamentally what you actually do, which really reveals who you are, in that maybe we haven't seen someone new in a while. It's always real funny sometimes when I walk into a church that's been declining, and people in the church have not met me yet. And I walk in and people go, "You must be Scott." Well, why would you assume that?
That's a good point. Yeah.
Why would you not assume that I'm just some new person who's visiting? Why would you assume you must be the guy that we, plan to have come visit us?
Mm-hmm.
That's not great, right?
Yeah.
So this kind of organizational hypocrisy between who we say we are and who we actually are the kinds of things that we must come face to face with and confront them. We've got to confront these things if we're going to break free of decline.
Yeah, Scott, this is reminding me of one of our more Google searched articles from quite a while ago, years ago, on why committed Christians leave the church. And it gets a lot of comments. We don't publish all of them, but probably if I had to think through the comments that we get, the theme that rises to the top the most is hypocrisy. People telling stories about why they left their church, and it's because of Christian hypocrisy. And this is, there's always more to the story. The truth is always in the middle somewhere, but something is going on. People's expectations are different from their realities, either on the side of, the person in the pew or the church itself. So this is not a figment of our imagination. There are people in churches, all across America, or probably around the world, that think their church comes across one way, but it in reality is different than that. And it doesn't endear them to most people. So
No.
That's the point of this. It takes a strategic leadership team with real honesty and seeking truth to come to these realizations themselves. And sometimes some metrics can kind of provide some reality, a little bit of a wake-up call.
Maybe.
And other times it's just simply really thinking about, what is this place really like? But when you can come to an honest conclusion like that, gosh, you have really made some true progress.
I mean, at best, most churches have sort of an above the waterline, if we were using the iceberg metaphor. Yeah. They have some sort of above the waterline knowledge of how things are going. They know how, okay, we are seeing fewer people, there's less money, whatever. There's been these external issues, but they usually don't know why. Why are these things happening? And oftentimes churches don't see the problems because they don't want to see them.
Yeah.
And it takes intentionality to step back and do some self-reflection. And quite honestly, plug for the church ministry analysis, get some help, get an external set of eyes to look at what's going on. There's no shame in doing that. In fact, all the epistles were written specifically because of this. All of Paul's letters were written. They were an external set of eyes helping to see the challenges and give some advice on how to move forward in them. So you can get a free sample report. Go to malfirstgroup.com/CMA and check out how we might be able to help your church do an assessment.
Yeah, that's a great place to start. All right, Scott, our next point here, and I love this, is take risks and innovate. And I don't know, man, I get charged up about this, especially, churches that really have become very inward, very fearful. Oh my gosh, Jesus was an innovator and Jesus was a risk taker. God in his wonderful, strategic plan for the universe from his first thought, laid things out. And there's even been a song, about kind of being reckless. So from a point of view, you could certainly see God's plan as reckless. but it certainly, he's not a God of status quo. He's I just love this. Your church has got to step out and kind of put some stuff on the line every now and then. When you come to the decision that maybe what we're doing now isn't good, what we're doing now isn't driving us towards a healthy and exciting and successful future, and by success I mean making disciples of Jesus, then you've got to take some risks, and it takes some leadership to say, you know what, it's worth it. It's worth what we've been called to do is worth putting it on the line, and against the pushback that you'll inevitably get, and say, we got to go for this. We can't stay where we are.
Yeah, man. I want to say, I put this in the article, but failure must become an option.
Yeah, I love that.
You know, you can't say failure is not an option. Failure is always an option. That option's always on the table. And in fact, if you don't take risks, failure is your destiny, ultimately, right?
Yep.
So if you take a risk, there's a chance that you could fail. That's true. But there's an upside. There's potential upside. If you don't take a risk, your fate is sealed. Your church will close. Maybe not today or tomorrow, maybe not even a year from now, but at some point, go long enough without taking any risks and your church will close. And I was reminded as you were talking, AJ, about Luke chapter 10, when Jesus sends out the 72. There was an inherent risk. What if we go, I mean, and Jesus accounts for this even as he's giving instructions. You know, what if we go into a town and the people don't receive us?
Yeah.
You know, you can't just assume that we're going to go into a town and someone's going to let us stay with them and they're going to feed us and house us and all this. And so, you know, Jesus starts by saying, hey, if you go into a place and someone takes you in, don't go from house to house, just stay there. Let them feed you, let them take care of you. You know, the worker is worth his wages. You know, but then he says, but when you enter a town, verse 10, but when you enter a town and are not welcomed, go into the streets and say, even the dust of your town we wipe from our feet as a warning to you. You know, he just says, literally, shake it off.
Yep.
It's Taylor Swift got the song "Stray Here" from Jesus. Shake it off, and move on.
Not worth even taking the dust from their streets with you.
That's right. And so failure must become an option for your church.
Yeah.
If you're going to move forward, you have to take risks. You might fail, but you might not. You might not.
Yeah, man. All right. So that was another book plug. That was what, the Bible, Scott?
This one is called The Bible.
Who was that one written by? Who's the author on that?
The Creator of the Universe.
But available on Amazon.
I really like this one. This is a lay flat version. It's great for preaching. So. I'll add that to my stack of books.
Yes, that's it's another resource for you. We like to use that one quite a bit.
Yeah.
All right. Last point. Value collective performance over personal preservation. Oh my goodness, your ego might be on the chopping block with this one, folks. Church leaders, lead well. How about that? Lead from a point of service, build a team, work together, unify your church, and work towards a common end goal, which see point number one for what that might be. But yeah, we've got to be in this together, Scott, and driving the team forward.
Yeah. You know, we won't spend a lot of time on this point. The wins and the losses, you've got to share them. You know, if you take a risk and it works, it can't be about you. That was my idea. Look how great that was. If there's a loss, you can't say, I told you so. You got to share them. And in fact, if there's going to be personal ownership, personally own the losses and share the wins. This isn't just small churches. In fact, I've worked on staff in large churches and worked consulted with large churches, and I see it a lot in large churches where they tend to silo themselves off and go, well, I've got my thing.
Yeah.
I'm doing my thing. I don't really care what the rest of the church is doing because I'm just in student ministry or I'm just in worship ministry or whatever. And that is self-sabotaging in the long run. This is how big churches become small churches. Is everyone kind of just does their own thing and stays in their lane, and they don't see it as a we, it's a me, and that's a problem.
Yeah.
And so big churches start their slow decline towards death when they only care about their thing. But certainly I see it in small churches too. I'm sure you do too, AJ, where like, a board member only cares about the missions budget. Like they don't care about anything else except so long as no one touches missions budget, then I'm fine. So that kind of thing won't work. Everything has to be on the table. When you're trying to make deep change, everything's on the table, and the wins are shared and the losses are shared.
Yeah, that's how you get there. Yeah, Scott, we could probably wrap this up with that. These are some fundamentals that may be overlooked, and so I hope our listeners today are kind of really considering this. You can read today's article at malversegroup.com/ what episode is this, Scott? 91.
90.
90?
90. 90.
malversegroup.com/90 to read this. Yeah, because Scott's points are a little bit expanded here. We've had I guess maybe some subconscious theme here, Scott, for a couple of weeks, building towards unity in the church, which that's a big deal. That's where true ministry happens. And in fact, I was just reading something. Register for a conference this morning, and one of their verses was out of John chapter 17, which speaks in great length on unity in the church. And so that's where
another way that you can build unity in the church.
How can you do that, Scott?
By staying connected throughout the week, and not just on Sundays. And you could use a tool like Faith Street. Oh, come on! Usually you've got the segues. That was pretty good. Come on,
I set you up.
That's true. Okay, fine. I get a half a point.
Run with it.
Thanks. Thanks to our sponsor, Faith Street, for helping us out with this week's episode. faithstreet.com/Malfers. Get 20% off. And really, it's a great tool to help build community from Sunday to Sunday. It's built by church leaders. It's a great way to get your church less dependent on Facebook and more dependent on the Lord by using a tool that's built by people who love the Lord. So go to faithstreet.com/Malfers. Get 20% off. See if it's a good fit for you and your church.
Yeah, all jokes aside, I mean, we like to kid around with that, and but we are serious about your church being on mission, being unified for expansion of the kingdom, and so that's why we're here with you this week and every week, and we'll be back again next week again. So I hope you'll join us. In the meantime, if there's anything we can do for you, if there's any prayer that we can be bringing to the Lord on your behalf, go to malversegroup.com. We've got a lot of information about what we do. We've got some resources there for you, or you could email us, leadership@malversegroup.com. We love connecting with church leaders just like you, and we're anxious to hear what's happening and see if there's anything we can do to help you. Because when you win, we all win, and we just want to see growth of the kingdom and people come to know the Lord. And you just never know what big vision impact can get changed in your church that will lead to that just really changing lives that you just don't even know that are out there yet. So go for it. Take that risk. Come back and see us again next week. Thanks for being with us. God bless you.